Farming in medieval times was brutal. Backbreaking labor, endless days in the fields, and a constant fight against hunger. Yet somehow, farmers cracked the code. Without machines, without modern science, they figured out how to grow more food while working less. How did they do it? How did simple peasants turn harsh lands into thriving fields that fed villages, built towns, and changed Europe forever? This is the untold story of clever inventions, community power, and the silent revolution that transformed medieval farming. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss incredible stories that bring history to life. And tell us in the comments, which era of history fascinates you the most? Now, let's uncover how medieval farmers rewrote the rules of survival. In the early Middle Ages, life in Europe revolved entirely around survival. Fields stretched endlessly, yet yielded little. Farming was grueling work. Peasants and smallholders labored from dawn until dusk, yet faced constant threats of famine. The land itself seemed indifferent to human effort. Thin, nutrient-depleted soils, rudimentary tools, and unpredictable weather all conspired to make farming an endless struggle. Year after year, yields remained pitiful. For every seed sown, perhaps only 2 or 3 were harvested. Most of the population lived on the brink of starvation. In those dark centuries, the farmer's work was intensely manual. Wooden plows barely scratched the surface of heavy soils. Oxen were slow, difficult to steer, and costly to maintain. Seeds were scattered by hand, often unevenly, which led to poor growth. Weeds thrived. Harvesting was equally primitive, done with sickles and hands. Entire communities toiled together, yet results fell short of sustaining even modest populations. Hunger and malnutrition haunted Europe. But change was on the horizon. Slowly, over generations, medieval farmers began to adopt ideas and tools that would revolutionize their work and reshape society. These advances, though seemingly simple, were transformative. Farming would become less about endless toil and more about clever adaptation to the land. The first crucial innovation came in the form of the heavy plow. Unlike its light predecessor, the heavy plow featured a large iron blade that could cut deep into the heavy, clay-rich soils of northern Europe. This not only turned over the earth more effectively but also brought rich, fertile subsoil to the surface. The new plow cut furrows cleanly and allowed better aeration and drainage. Where once fields were patchy and uneven, they now became uniform and productive. Crops could root more deeply and grow more robustly. The heavy plow had other effects too. It made certain areas that had been previously unsuitable for agriculture suddenly productive. Dense forests and boggy lands in places like Germany, France, and England could now be cleared and cultivated. This expansion of farmland helped to increase food production dramatically. Yet, the heavy plow was not something a single farmer could easily manage. It required multiple oxen or horses to pull, which encouraged villagers to work together. Farming became a more communal effort, organized around the shared use of this powerful new tool. Still, plowing and planting were only part of the battle. Another quiet revolution was taking place in the structure of the agricultural year. In earlier centuries, farmers used a two-field system. One half of the land was planted while the other lay fallow to recover. While simple, this system limited production. Half of the land produced nothing each year, and soil exhaustion remained a serious problem. By the 8th and 9th centuries, a smarter method began to spread, the three-field system. This system divided land into 3 parts. One part grew winter crops like wheat or rye, another hosted spring crops such as oats or legumes, and the third was left fallow. Each year, the fields rotated. This simple yet ingenious system brought several advantages. Not only was more land used at any one time, but different crops demanded different nutrients. Legumes, for instance, fixed nitrogen in the soil, naturally fertilizing it. This rotation preserved soil health, reduced the need to leave fields idle, and increased total yields. Thanks to these innovations, the heavy plow and the three-field rotation, medieval farmers began to harvest more food with less manual labor per acre. This wasn't yet modern farming, but it marked the beginning of a significant transformation. Yields rose slowly but steadily. Villages became better fed. Populations began to grow. And with more reliable harvests came the chance to focus on other pursuits: trade, craftsmanship, even learning. For the first time in centuries, Europe began to feel the stirrings of prosperity. As fields became more productive and farming methods improved, medieval society began seeking new ways to lighten the burden of agricultural labor even further. One of the most important breakthroughs came not from the soil, but from the stable. The ox, long the staple of medieval plowing teams, was slowly being challenged by a more dynamic partner, the horse. Oxen were strong, but they were slow. Their hooves sank deeply into soft ground, and they required frequent rests. In contrast, horses were faster, more agile, and could cover greater distances in a day. Yet, for centuries, their power remained untapped in farming. This was largely due to poor harness technology. Traditional collars pressed against the animal's windpipe, restricting its breathing. Horses could not pull heavy loads effectively without choking. Around the 9th century, a transformative invention changed that: the horse collar. This padded, rigid device shifted the point of pressure from the throat to the shoulders, allowing horses to pull heavy plows and carts without injury or strain. Coupled with iron horseshoes, which protected their hooves and gave them better traction, horses rapidly began to replace oxen in many areas of Europe. A team of horses could plow a field in half the time it took oxen, meaning that farmers could work larger areas with less effort and in fewer hours. At the same time, improvements in plow design made tilling the land easier and more efficient. The introduction of the moldboard plow, which turned the soil to one side and created ridges and furrows, became widespread. This better aerated the ground and helped retain moisture, which was vital in drier regions. Farmers noticed the difference: crops sprouted faster and grew more evenly. These new plows were also more durable. Iron tips and reinforced frames meant they could endure harder soils and last through multiple seasons without replacement. Meanwhile, another silent revolution unfolded in the seedbed. The old method of broadcasting, scattering seeds by hand, was terribly inefficient. Birds, wind, and uneven spreading wasted precious grain. But change was coming. Though slow to spread, by the 12th century, more advanced regions began experimenting with seed drills and furrow planting methods. These innovations allowed farmers to deposit seeds directly into the soil at controlled depths and intervals, improving germination rates and crop uniformity. Less seed was wasted, and yields grew without adding extra labor. Farmers also began to refine crop choices and breeding techniques. Selective breeding was subtle at first, keeping the best seeds from the strongest, healthiest plants. Over time, this practice led to more resilient and productive varieties of staple crops. Wheat, barley, rye, and oats gradually became hardier and more resistant to pests and diseases. In addition to food crops, medieval farmers increasingly cultivated fodder plants, like clover and vetch, to feed livestock during the winter. These nitrogen-fixing plants enriched the soil while ensuring animals remained healthy and productive year-round. Healthy animals, in turn, meant better manure, an often overlooked but vital resource. Manure, once considered little more than waste, became recognized as a valuable fertilizer. Farmers gathered it carefully and spread it on their fields, enriching the earth and boosting yields with minimal extra effort. Together, these advances created a web of benefits. Stronger animals pulled better plows. Improved planting techniques reduced seed waste. Fodder crops nourished animals and restored soil fertility. Manure fed the crops, creating a cycle of abundance. Where once medieval farmers labored endlessly for small rewards, they now harvested more food with proportionally less human toil. Though life remained challenging, these innovations offered hope. Fields stretched wider, granaries grew fuller, and hunger slowly receded from daily life. With more free time and surplus produce, medieval villagers could finally begin turning their gaze beyond the furrows, toward market towns, local fairs, and distant lands of opportunity. While horses and better plows transformed fieldwork, another crucial breakthrough began to reshape farming, and it came not from muscle, but from nature itself. Medieval farmers and millers began to harness forces far beyond their own strength, water, and wind. These natural powers would change how food was processed, reduce human labor, and make farming life more efficient and prosperous. By the 11th and 12th centuries, watermills were spreading rapidly across Europe. Rivers and streams, once obstacles to agriculture, now became assets. Ingenious engineers and local craftsmen designed wooden wheels that captured the energy of flowing water, converting it into rotational force. These mills ground grain far more quickly and consistently than hand-powered querns or mortars ever could. For centuries, grinding flour was one of the most exhausting and time-consuming tasks for rural families. Before mills, women and children often spent hours every day manually crushing grain to prepare enough flour for bread, the cornerstone of the medieval diet. Watermills dramatically changed this reality. Now, instead of grinding grain themselves, farmers could bring their harvest to the local mill. There, the miller, often working as part of a lord's estate, would process huge quantities of grain in a fraction of the time. Though millers took a share of the flour as payment, the benefit to peasants was clear. Days of labor were saved, freeing families for other crucial tasks. Not every village had access to flowing water, however. In regions where rivers were scarce or unreliable, farmers and inventors turned to the skies. Windmills, first appearing in Europe in the late 12th century, became essential in drier or flatter lands like those in the Low Countries, modern-day Netherlands and Belgium. These mills harnessed the wind to turn grinding mechanisms, pump water, and even assist in simple industrial tasks like sawing wood or crushing seeds for oil. Both watermills and windmills not only reduced human labor but also introduced medieval farmers to the idea of mechanical time saving. With grinding handled mechanically, people had more hours for sowing, harvesting, repairing tools, tending animals, and even socializing or engaging in trade. This shift marked a subtle yet profound transformation in rural life. Meanwhile, advancements in irrigation techniques ensured that crops received adequate moisture. Although large-scale irrigation projects like those in ancient Mesopotamia or Rome were rare in medieval Europe, local solutions flourished. Farmers dug small channels and ditches to divert water from streams to their fields, especially in southern regions prone to summer droughts. Monasteries often led the way in refining these systems, applying knowledge from ancient texts alongside practical observation. The cumulative result of these innovations was clear. Fields became more productive not only because farmers worked harder, but because they worked smarter. By delegating heavy, repetitive tasks to machines powered by water and wind, rural communities optimized labor in ways earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Grinding, pumping, and even threshing could now be automated to some degree. This allowed medieval farmers to concentrate their efforts where they mattered most, in managing planting cycles, animal care, and market relationships. Of course, not every region adopted these changes at the same pace. Remote or mountainous areas continued to rely on older methods, and social hierarchies often determined access to new technologies. Yet, wherever mills turned and horses plowed, life grew just a little easier. Fewer hands were needed for basic survival, and more were free to contribute to village crafts, religious life, and trade. By the 13th century, these cumulative improvements had begun to reshape Europe itself. Surpluses became more common. Markets grew larger and more vibrant. Towns and cities expanded. Slowly but surely, the innovations born on medieval farms were laying the foundation for a broader economic and social transformation. By the high medieval period, farming was no longer solely about individual survival. It had become deeply tied to community cooperation. Innovations in agriculture flourished not in isolation but through collective effort, and this social dimension played a crucial role in helping medieval farmers produce more food with less backbreaking work. At the heart of rural society was the manorial system, a structure that governed most agricultural villages across Europe. The lord owned the land, but peasants, including free tenants and serfs, worked it. This arrangement could be oppressive, as peasants owed labor and produce to the lord. Yet, paradoxically, it also fostered cooperation and shared responsibility. Fields in medieval villages were typically divided into long, narrow strips, allocated among villagers. This open field system encouraged neighbors to work together. Plowing, planting, and harvesting were synchronized, as individual farmers could not easily manage these large communal tasks alone. Instead of working isolated plots, villagers collaborated. They shared plows, oxen, horses, and knowledge. Tasks were often coordinated through local customs and decisions made in manorial courts or village meetings. Such cooperative labor was especially evident during harvest. Speed was essential. Crops needed to be gathered before they spoiled or were lost to weather. Entire villages mobilized in a spirit of mutual assistance. Reapers, binders, and cart drivers worked side by side. Even children and the elderly had roles, whether gleaning leftover grains or driving livestock away from vulnerable fields. What could have been weeks of solitary, grueling work became a communal event. Hard labor, yes, but faster and more efficient because it was shared. Beyond the fields, the common pastures and forests also played vital roles. Livestock grazed on communal lands, reducing the burden of feeding animals individually. Woodlands provided fuel and building materials. Water sources were protected and maintained by all. Though disputes could arise, customary laws and local agreements helped regulate usage fairly. This collective management of natural resources minimized waste and ensured steady access to essential materials. In addition to physical cooperation, medieval farmers shared knowledge across generations. Farming manuals, though rare in rural villages, began appearing by the 12th century among educated monks and scholars. Monastic communities, in particular, became centers of agricultural experimentation and teaching. Monks wrote about crop rotation, soil health, grafting, and even pest control. Their techniques gradually spread beyond monastery walls, influencing secular farming practices. Moreover, traveling merchants, craftsmen, and pilgrims often carried farming ideas across regions. In bustling marketplaces and along trade routes, peasants could learn about improved tools, seeds, or farming schedules used elsewhere. Word of mouth became a powerful vector for agricultural advancement. Even illiterate farmers adapted quickly when they saw firsthand how certain methods could lighten their workload. Perhaps one of the most subtle yet powerful innovations was the increasing reliance on contracts and leases. While still heavily shaped by feudal obligations, many peasants began negotiating rents and services that replaced some of their labor dues. This shift from labor services to monetary payments incentivized productivity. Farmers who could produce surplus crops sold them at markets, using the proceeds to pay rent and invest in their land and tools. Over time, this led to greater autonomy and a move toward more efficient, profit-driven agriculture. By combining better tools, smarter land management, animal power, and, crucially, community effort, medieval farmers achieved something remarkable. They transformed agriculture from a purely survival-based activity into a more organized, productive system. Though still vulnerable to droughts, pests, and war, villages now stood a better chance of weathering hard times. The landscape of Europe was changing. Fields spread further, harvests grew richer, and for the first time in generations, ordinary people had the chance not only to live but to improve their lives. The seeds of this transformation were sown, quite literally, in the shared labor and innovations of medieval farmers. By the close of the medieval era, Europe's countryside had been reshaped not just physically, but socially and economically. What had once been a landscape of hard survival slowly transformed into one of calculated efficiency. The innovations medieval farmers embraced, heavy plows, crop rotation, horsepower, water and windmills, cooperative systems, built the very foundation upon which towns, trade, and eventually cities would flourish. As populations grew during the High Middle Ages, so too did the demand for food. Yet thanks to smarter farming methods, production largely kept pace. Surpluses became more common, and with them came profound changes to medieval life. Farmers could now produce enough not only to feed themselves but also to trade. Weekly markets in towns and annual fairs in regional centers became critical hubs of commerce. Grains, cheese, wool, and other agricultural products flowed out of villages, while salt, iron tools, and luxury items flowed in. This rural surplus was the lifeblood of medieval economies. As markets grew, so did opportunities for farmers to break free from the rigid manorial structure. The rise of a cash economy increasingly allowed peasants to pay rents rather than work days for the lord. Over generations, some villages negotiated charters granting them partial self-governance and freedom from some feudal duties. Others pooled their resources to purchase common rights or privileges. The increased efficiency of farming, driven by innovation, slowly fostered the decline of the rigid feudal order. Technological progress continued into the later Middle Ages. Metal tools became sturdier and sharper. Scythes replaced sickles for faster harvesting. Better grain storage reduced losses to pests and moisture. Simple yet effective devices like the flail, used to thresh grain, sped up what had once been laborious post-harvest processing. Even seasonal labor became better organized. Entire itinerant workforces of harvesters traveled from region to region, helping to bring in crops at peak times. Farming, while still hard work, had become systematically managed. However, this progress was not without challenges. As European populations boomed in the 13th century, even improved farming methods began to strain under the weight of demand. Marginal lands, steep hillsides, marshes, and thin soils were brought into cultivation to increase output. This expansion had limits. Eventually, yields plateaued, and with less fallow land and exhausted soils, vulnerability returned. By the early 14th century, poor harvests combined with a changing climate to trigger famines, reminding all of the fragile balance between humans and the land. Yet, even in the face of setbacks, the lessons of the previous centuries endured. Farmers who survived the plagues, wars, and climatic upheavals of the late Middle Ages carried with them the techniques that had once revolutionized their ancestors' lives. The knowledge of crop rotation, the value of manure, the importance of draft animals and mechanical assistance, these would not be forgotten. Instead, they became the inherited wisdom that laid the groundwork for future agricultural revolutions. By the dawn of the Renaissance and into the early modern period, Europe stood transformed. The simple yet profound innovations of medieval farmers, growing more with less labor, enabled everything that followed. Expanding towns, rising literacy, cultural flourishing, and the growth of nation-states all rested on the ability of rural populations to produce stable and plentiful food supplies. In the fields of medieval Europe, the story of humanity's tireless effort to master the land played out quietly but powerfully. Every furrow cut by a heavy plow, every seed carefully sown, and every sack of flour ground in a village mill represented not just survival, but progress. Through ingenuity, cooperation, and hard-won knowledge, medieval farmers did more than feed their neighbors, they shaped the world to come. So, could you have done it? Could you have endured endless battles, crushing armor, and the unforgiving code that ruled every knight's life? Few today could survive the brutal reality these warriors faced daily. Yet through pain and sacrifice, they shaped history, leaving behind legends built on hardship, not fairy tales. If this story opened your eyes to the darker side of medieval life, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share this video with friends who love history as much as you do. Drop a comment below. What part of the knight's life surprised you the most? Thanks for watching and being part of this journey into the raw and ruthless past.